Hi.
Hi.
We're missing one.
We are, but she'll be here soon, I'm sure.
Where is she?
It's the least important one, it's fine.
Oh, man. She teased us. And hello, everyone, because we're probably live now. We should be live, and I'm hoping that everyone is switching on. I love this period right at the beginning of one of these things where people are like, hang on, I'm trying to get ready, I'm trying to do it, but they're not quite there yet. But I hadn't been anticipating that it was going to be Crabb.
Look, I've got more experience with her than you, and so yes, I was.
Do we give her a minute? Do we give her a minute? Or
yeah, I can see she's just coming in now, actually.
Oh, here she
is.
Oh, Dal, were you busy putting on your lippy?
Come on now, don't be like that. I've actually got lippy on because I've been at an event. So I am pre-beautified. I haven't.
So what city are you in? Where are you?
I'm in Adelaide.
Very nice.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yep, I've just been at an international education conference interviewing the two vice chancellors of the soon-to-be merged University of Adelaide and University of South Australia.
And is there some kind of bacchanalia or party going on in that hotel room behind you? Because I know you've got yourself very tightly framed. I'm just wondering what you're framing out of shot.
Well, you get to an age where you don't have fantasies about being in a hotel room with somebody else anymore. You have fantasies about being in a hotel room by yourself, and that is
right.
what I'm doing. I have got a glass of champagne and an empty bed, and I'm going to be in bed by 9, baby.
Well, listen, you two, just shush for a moment because they gave me permission to drive the bus tonight. And people are a bit excited that I got to drive the bus. I drove it successfully last time for the first book club, so fingers crossed for a second one. I just want to kick off by saying that we are here tonight, of course, to talk about Storytellers by Leigh Sales, but wherever you are in this country watching this chat and joining in, hopefully, you are on land that has a rich tradition of storytelling by Indigenous Australians that goes back thousands of years, and we acknowledge and respect that wherever you might be. Hey, the other thing that I want to let everyone know is that if you want to throw up any questions to Salesy or Crabb, quite frankly, you can
you're in the book too.
Huh? Me?
Or you, because you're in the book too.
No, I'm not taking questions tonight.
That was in her rider, that and a whole lot of kittens that are in her apartment.
You can jump into the comment section on the YouTube live sidebar and you can leave your comments or questions there and we'll get to them as the chat goes on. So, oh my God, we've already got a question. So that is going to be the first one. I'm not asking it yet though. Hey, listen, this book is great. Crabb just admitted on her social media that she had not yet finished it.
Oh, look, I mean, I got a copy of it ages ago and I read the bit with me in it. And then I read a couple choice bits. I read the bit with you in it, Lisa, and I'm just catching up on some of the ones that I didn't quite get to. But my bit is amazing, I think.
It is amazing. Did you ever hear about, Crabb, did you ever hear about a thing called, in America, they call it the Washington Read? And it's when a book comes out and you go straight to the index or the acknowledgements to see if you're actually mentioned, and that's the bit you read, because everyone in Washington is far too important to actually read the whole book. So when I got this book, Crabb, I thought, wow, there's so many amazing people here, like editors and executive producers and brilliant camera operators. And oh my God, Salesy has included us, Crabb. I'm really touched. Yeah. And so I went to the acknowledgements. Crabb, and I read, thank you to Lisa Millar and Annabelle Crabb. Wow. No. We are mentioned first.
Really?
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa Millar and Annabelle Crabb, for being interviews number 1 and number 2. The lab rats on whom I could test my audio and transcription software.
Wow.
That is why she used us.
With the otter test canaries, okay?
I don't know how that makes me
How
feel.
else do you think you two would have qualified? I mean, I had to have a couple of randoms in there just to, you know, check the gear was working before I went to your Richard Fidlers and your Benjamin Laws.
My God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly.
Did I even say like that I thank you with love and gratitude or anything? Or?
Yeah, like the word love is used. I mean, Lisa Millar's first, as befits the best friend, I guess. And yeah, wow, incredible. What I really respect about you, Leigh Sales, is that you've managed to, I assume you got a tidy advance for this book, that you got your friends to effectively write for you. Like, I mean, come on, mate.
No, come on, let's not
service.
let's not mislead the listeners or viewers this evening. Nobody actually did anything except talk to me for an hour. That was the sum total of your contributions, and you two would have had to go again had I screwed up the software. So I'll count you each for 2 hours just because that was the backup plan, just in case.
I'm still waiting for the champers to arrive, but anyway.
Yeah, wow, mine hasn't been delivered either, buddy. Like, wow. But I mean, I've got to say, it is a handsome-looking book, and I really like your little ginger nut, you know, in.
Well, I was adamant that I didn't want my face on the cover because I think there's nothing, you know. You know what I was about to say? There's nothing worse than having your face on the cover of a book, but then I realised Lisa Millar's.
Whoa!
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. And the next book that's coming out has got my face on the cover as well. But it does have dogs too. So
This is like the time I dissed Brian Schmidt accidentally by saying I don't like wearing my Order of Australia pin because it makes me look like a wanker. And Crabb went, well, Brian's got his on.
One of the happiest moments of my life, that was.
No, I didn't. I thought that they might want a big cheesy kind of, you know, shot of my mug on the cover, and so I.
Oh, maybe that one with your classic pose where you do this. Right now.
or this.
Well, that would have been attractive and inviting to the readers of Australia, wouldn't it?
Exactly. What about just like a moving gif of you folding your glasses? You know?
Yeah, that's right. Just.
Now listen. Why did you write this book? Why did you write this book?
Okay, a few reasons. I wrote it because.
Well, she didn't write it, like, to be clear.
I did.
She had conversations with people and then she ran the transcript through Otter. So writing.
I'll tell you about the actual process in a second. But no, years ago I read a book called oh God, what was it actually called? I can't remember now, but it was about narrative non-fiction writing, and it was a whole lot of American writers. Oh, I know what it was called, the new journalism. And so it was about when writers started in the United States using the tools of fiction to write long-form non-fiction. So your Truman Capotes, your Tom Wolfes, your people like that. And it was a series of conversations with these people about their craft. And I love hearing about craft, you know, for anything really, anyone that's passionate about what they do. And I found it really interesting. And with writing, I've always enjoyed talking to people about the different ways that they write. So, for example, I don't start writing anything until I've mapped out a really clear structure about what I want to say. But then I know lots of other people just start writing and they see what comes out and then they fix it up. So I enjoy that kind of thing. And when I read this book which was about book writing, I thought, God, that would be really good to do in journalism, because I knew myself from working in journalism that there were so many different ways people go about it. So that had been kind of percolating in my head for years and years. Then also I just have been, I guess, more and more concerned over time that there's fewer opportunities to learn journalism from or communication from other experts, because, you know, lots of people work from home, they're out of the office. It's not like the olden days where you were sort of sitting in an office and you could hear what people did. The other thing is I'm asked so often by people about the media and behind the scenes of the media and how it works. People are very fascinated by it. And I also think a lot of the tools that all of us use as professional storytellers, like I'm often struck that the way humans connect with each other is through our ability to tell stories. And as you pointed out, Lisa, in the acknowledgement to country, that is a tradition that is absolutely ancient. And so I think that the tools that professional storytellers use are actually applicable to anyone, whether you're telling an anecdote to a neighbour over a fence, or whether you're a lawyer trying to persuade a jury, or whatever. And so it was the combination of all of those things that made me think, yeah, you know what, I think that people might actually be interested in this.
Well, I'm sure they would be. I was just looking at the questions just rolling in already, and we will get to them pretty quickly. A reminder for people, if you are joining us and you do want to ask any of us a question, you jump into the comments on the YouTube live sidebar to leave it there, and I am getting all those questions. I was watching the Channel 7 news tonight. Actually, by the way, it's been a pretty grim couple of days, I've got to say, news-wise. And so we kind of, I think, try and give people a little bit of something to smile about tonight, which is what you
Yes.
can do. But I was watching a story by Chris Reason tonight. He was actually covering Pat Farmer finishing his run, and he'll end up at Uluru tomorrow in support of the voice referendum. But it again reminded me why Chris Reason is such an incredible TV reporter, because he can turn any story, like Pat Farmer has not yet arrived, it's not the final day, but he manages to turn it into such watchable television. And you've included him in the book, and there's a reason why you did that, and I want you to tell people.
Well, the reason he's in there is because I think he's, the best television news reporter in the country. I think he's absolutely phenomenal. But I mean, Rizo and I have overlapped on a few occasions, but the one that springs to mind, he's the kind of reporter, if you shop at a story and you bump into Chris Reason, as you would know, Lisa, you go, oh no, Rizo's on it, because I know I'm going to get my ass kicked now. But when in 2007, or was it 7, can't remember, I think 7, David Hicks, who was an Australian who was held at Guantanamo Bay, was finally being returned home after all of these years of imprisonment. And as a lot of journos know, when you're on a big story, it kind of tells itself. A big yarn is kind of easy to write. It's obvious what's happening. So the day one story, completely obvious. This dude who's been in an American prison all this time, finally home. The day 2 story, where we all were expected to file a follow-up, there was absolutely nothing happening at all, and no one was speaking. And the only person who had their head up all day, this was in Adelaide, was the spokesperson from the South Australian Department of Corrective Services. And he did one of the most boring press conferences I've ever been to. It was basically, and I'm not exaggerating, it was basically at 0600, Mr. Hicks was escorted from his cell to the shower block. At 6:15, he was returned and received a bowl of Weet-Bix. Mr. Hicks requested additional milk, which was then provided. At 06:30, Mr. Hicks was escorted, just went on and on like this. And so I left and just thought, oh, that's so boring. And I just kind of ripped out a really dull, boring story, filed it off, and then I was meeting Rizo for a drink, and I thought I'd better whack on 7 News and see what Chris Reason's got. Now, Rizo did not have one additional thing that beyond what I had. He had exactly the same material, but he opened his story with archival footage from Guantanamo Bay, the very famous shots on the first day when the first lot of prisoners arrived from Afghanistan, shot on the long lens, the dudes in the orange jumpsuits all shackled together in the grainy vision on the airport tarmacs, the hoods over the heads and so forth. And the opening line of his script was, after years of the utmost secrecy, now we're getting every last detail. And then he went to, at 0600, Mr. Hicks, blah, blah. Yeah, and it was such creative use of the material. And the difference between me and him was he viewed that as a challenge. Like, what does this say? What can I use to illustrate this? And I've told that story many times over the years to journalism students, and Rizo knew I was going to put it in this book. And he, at my Sydney book event, came and he said, I've got a present for you. And he pulled out an envelope, and I opened it, and it was the original script from the 2007 story with a beautiful little note to me from Rizo on it. It was very sentimental. What a softie he is.
Oh, he is. Hey, I want to ask one of the questions that have come in, which is from Lewis, who said, what was something you learned about journalism through the process of writing the book?
It just reminded me, to be honest, that it's not brain surgery, and that the most important thing in good journalism is curiosity and following up. And I'm sure Crabb would attest to this as well, that so many of the amazing reporters in this book and so many of the famous stories that people talk about, the genesis of it is in people just going, oh, that seems a bit weird. But instead of just thinking, oh, that seems a bit weird, and then, just letting it go through to the keeper, they would actually then make some phone calls to find out, why is this a bit weird? And so that, I think, was the chief. I mean, I knew that, but it reminded me about that and how important that is.
Crabb?
Yeah, I think also there is a kind of a theme running through the book, most of which I've read, that is also about just being a bit of a freak. Like, I mean, whether it's Kate McClymont making 30 calls just on a sort of a hunch thing, like, or Samantha Maiden, who says that a bunch of her stories come from just getting the shits. Like, if she thinks that somebody is lying to her, she just has this sort of annoyed kind of reflex where she's just like, well, I'm just going to see if you're lying to me, which is what happened, when Scott Morrison's office was not confirming that he was on holiday in Hawaii. It was sort of one of those stories that could have not been a story had they been more upfront about it. But because his office made her feel so weird about ringing up and asking about it, that she sort of got the shits.
Yeah.
And that's, like, that's a kind of a really common thing, I think. But I definitely agree with Sales about curiosity. I think that, genuine interest in how other people tick and why they make the decisions that they do is something that, has definitely fueled my interest in journalism over all of these years.
And Fiona wrote in actually with a question for me about the fact that I mention, like, I'm such a nosy sticky beak that if I see something happening anywhere, I'm like, oh, I wonder what's going on. I have the right as a journalist to go and find out and ask questions. And I mentioned in the interview with Leigh that I see police cars at the end of the street, and so I don't just go, gee, I wonder what they're doing. I go down there and ask them, what are you doing here? And
can I give the perfect, before you say that, can I just give another example of you doing that, everyone, which she just did on the weekend? We were down in the country in the Mornington Peninsula, and we stopped at a bakery to have lunch. And she got a pie and I got a sausage roll. And then I started up talking to her, like, do you reckon you could do a career change and come and run a country bakery? Do you think you'd be good at that? She's like, oh, yeah, it'd be fine. And I said, oh, the hours would suck, though. You've got to get up so early every day, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we finish yapping away, and then she goes back into the bakery, and I think, oh, she's gone in to get one of those raspberry brownies. And then the next thing I hear her grilling the baker, what time do you come to work? And then she comes out, she's like, oh, this guy doesn't start early. He does sourdough. He doesn't have to come in at 3 a.m. Blah, blah, blah. So this is exactly the instinct that good journalists have, which is she wants to know because, she's curious. And so she goes in and actually asks the guy.
Yeah.
That's interesting, though, don't you reckon, Sales? Because, like, you and Lisa and I are quite different. Like, Lisa and I are both total Mrs. Haverchats. Like,
oh, yeah.
I'm thrilled when I sit next to someone in their, like, aircraft and have an interesting conversation, or, like, I'll go to a conference and talk to somebody about their interesting job, and I'll be like, oh my God, you're so interesting. Whereas you're kind of like, please don't talk to me, but you're also, when you get into a deep rut of fascination with a particular subject, you are like an absolute dog with a bone. Like, you are a very deep diver of curiosity and information, but it doesn't really express itself in the same way as old Lisa. Like,
no, I'm more like, for example, I really like court reporting because I really like, we'll let you get to your question in a sec, Lisa, because I really like sitting there and observing and being able to just watch everyone, see what they're doing. Like, I really love doing that. And I love sitting back and connecting the dots. So I also like press conferences and political reporting because I like all the unsaid things that you can kind of get when you just sit back and observe, which again is a different kind of journalism. But what were you going to say, Lisa? Fiona had a question.
Just that Fiona wanted to know, because I never said what the police cars were doing. So Fiona wanted to know. Fiona is clearly a journalist. She wanted the details. Fiona, there'd been a break-in at one of the apartment garages and they'd stolen 2 jet skis, and it had been a real kind of blast out of their moment. But I had already gone to work, clearly, because I'm training to be a sourdough baker. And
That's interesting though, isn't it, though, sales? Because like I actually never did court reporting, and I really my shorthand wasn't good enough. Like when I did a cadetship,
interesting.
you had like T-line shorthand, and you had to get 120 words a minute to get graded as a journalist. And my shorthand teacher, the lovely woman called Helen Bibby, I think she sort of bent the rules for me in the end. Like she used to read out Hansard, and we'd have to take it down at 120 words a minute. And I think she basically ended up reading me a passage that had a lot of repetitive acronyms in it so that I could sort of pass it. But I was never fast enough to be a court reporter. And I was sort of disappointed by that. But I actually think that I would struggle with sitting in a courtroom and just only observing and not being able to ask questions.
But
Interesting. That's a good point. I thought everyone had to do court reporting. Hey, one of the interesting things Natalie has messaged in, she said she was surprised, the surprise inclusion in the book for her was Karl Stefanovic, and she's wondering why you chose to include him.
Ow!
I'm surprised that you'd be surprised by that. Because Karl is, and with the exception of David Koch, who's now retired, Karl is, the longest serving probably breakfast news anchor in Australia. And anchoring a breakfast news show for commercial television is extremely difficult. And it is for the ABC as well, as Lisa will attest. It is like you think about getting put on live television for 3.5 hours every day, and you have to be able to know enough about any subject on the planet that you can interview somebody about it off the top of your head. You have to be able to segue from really serious news to really light news. You have to be able to make a connection with the audience so they want to come back and watch you every day. It's an extraordinarily high degree of difficulty job in the world of television and in the world of journalism, and hardly anyone can do it, which is why the people that do it are paid a lot of money to do it. And so he's very, very good at that.
There was an interviewee, who was it? It wasn't Richard Feidler. Somebody who you interviewed in this book said, I feel envious of Karl Stefanovic. Was it like
Stan Grant? Stan Grant said that because Stan pointed out that Stan said he'd never felt at ease in his stints in commercial television, and he said he looked at people like Karl with total envy at their ability to be charming and to be funny and to move from light to shade and to keep things moving along and to mix up the pace. And to be able to do all of that on the fly. And he said that he felt really envious of the way that somebody like Karl could do that. I mean, I sort of see you, Lisa, and I think even, since you've been working on breakfast television, like the ease with which you can kind of just fill the space to take up however much time is required, in a way that somebody like me who's used to, say, hosting 7:30, where it's a very controlled environment, I'm rarely having to go off script except in the actual interviews, that most of the time when I'm talking to camera, it's scripted. And so the kind of stuff that Karl does, where he might be on television for 6-7 hours at a stretch with a rolling news stream that no one knows where it's going, I mean, that is a skill.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really like that chapter with Stan was really interesting, I reckon, just in the way that he visualized like what his brain is doing at any given point. I thought that was fascinating. Like, I think a number of people made the point that Stan is like one of the great padders in the business, like capacity to fill time.
Without notes, though.
And he has a photographic memory, Stan.
Right.
So he even at 7:30 he wouldn't read off the audio cue. He would just memorize what had to be said. He'd just look at the script and then just say it. So he retains. He's got the most extraordinary brain for retaining information. So you could literally, if Stan walked in right now and I said to Stan, Sri Lanka, go. Tell me what's happened in Sri Lanka in the past 100 years. He would be able to go off the top of his head about that. And then he could go, Stan, the history of exploration of Antarctica, go. And he would be able to do that. Like, it's absolutely extraordinary. He's amazing.
Talk to me about Kate McClymont, because Crabb mentioned her before, and man, she is one game woman. Like,
She'd be well known to people, especially in Sydney, as a major investigative reporter at the Sydney Morning Herald, and then now, also obviously readers in Melbourne and so forth. I'm not sure how well known she is outside of Sydney and Melbourne, but she tells the most incredible story about getting a cold call one day from this guy who was a school parent at a private, elite Sydney private school. And this guy was wound around the axle. And it was about, he wanted to complain about one of the other school fathers. And he said to McClymont, you must know him, his name's Michael Williamson. And she said, who? And he said, he's the head of the Health Services Union and he's the national president of the Labor Party. And I do not know how he can have as much money as he has. He's got 4 kids at this private school. He and his wife both drive a top-of-the-range Mercedes-Benz. She doesn't work. They've got a beach house. They fly overseas first class on holidays. He's a union boss. He's not supposed to earn anything more than the top-paid union member. So how is this possible? But the thing that had really gotten up this guy's nose, and the reason he'd chosen to cold call a journalist, was because this dad constantly outbid him at the school auction. And so McClymont, when she got off the phone, thought, that is kind of strange, actually. How does he have so much money? So she went and did a sort of company search on him, and she found he was the director of this particular company. Then she went and looked at the union's last annual report and saw that this company had been receiving a consultancy fee, which had been $1 million for the last year. And then she went to the third-party declarations, and there was no mention of the link between Michael Williamson and this union. Long story short, she checked out a few other bits of paper. Michael Williamson jailed for 5 years.
Yep.
And that other school dad has just been nailing it now at that school trivia night.
Kate has asked that she says she loves the balance and variety of the interviewees. How did you work out who to include? And we've talked about Carl, but what about the others? And how did you prepare what to ask them? Because all of the questions were so very different.
Yeah. So in terms of the choice of who to pick, it's completely subjective because it's by no means, the definitive list of the best journalists in Australia. I started actually not so much with the journalists, but with all the different kinds of journalism that I could think of. Do you know what I think is the glaring omission in this book? And it's because of my own blind spots and biases. It's sports journalism, which of course is a major strain of journalism in Australia. I kind of felt at the time like rounds reporting took in sport, but sport could have potentially had its whole own chapter,
Absolutely.
which it didn't.
Well, there's a second edition then coming.
Yeah. So I wrote down like news reporting, investigative journalism, foreign correspondent anchoring and so forth. And then I sat and I thought, okay, well, who comes to my mind first about those things? So when you think interviewing, you think Laurie Oakes, the former Channel 9 political editor. You think, I think Richard Feidler. So it's very subjective. But then also I wanted to be careful that it wasn't just full of my mates and ABC people. And because I do think that the skills that commercial journalists, tabloid journalists bring are unique and important, and that is a strand of journalism. So I then thought about people that, okay, who among my, commercial media colleagues do I have regard for what they do? Even though I might not agree with everything they do, I still think that they are very good at what they do. And then I kind of went and looked through it also for diversity to make sure, like, what's the gender balance like? Have we got people of different ages, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, people who went to university, people who didn't go to university? So there's tons of, amazing people that could have been included, but I just was looking for a whole, a very broad range of experience from people from all sorts of different walks of life.
Mm.
And then as for what to ask, sorry, I forgot to say that question. As for what to ask, so this was really important, which is I didn't want it to be, as Crabb says, a collection of people writing their own things. Like that would be boring to me because everyone, tends to, I think, then be like, oh, well, I believe in the principles of, democracy. And it's all very boring and kind of dull. I wanted it to be a more engaging kind of thing. And so therefore, what I was bringing to it was, okay, I have to steer these conversations so they all feel different to each other. So I don't, in the book myself, give any tips about how I do journalism or how I interview, but anyone who closely reads the book would be able to glean a lot of my methods and techniques if you just pay super close attention to how I've gone about it. So that was the kind of thing that I set for myself, that everyone had to get a different kind of conversation.
Nobody could be oblivious to your little bugbears either, right?
Yeah, there's plenty of examples where I talk about, for example, sloppy writing, or people inserting their opinion into their reporting and so on.
But the thing that I really like about the book, in all seriousness, and I'll stop, hazing you for a moment, is like there are so many elements of really hard and good journalism that are not always recognized, and some of them are about shot choice and editing and photography and having someone in your ear at the appropriate time, and how hard it is to carry on camera extensively when you don't know what's happening next. Like all of these things are hard to do, and I think that they're often kind of lionized to a greater or lesser extent. And what I like about the book is that it kind of explores all of those angles of what makes really good journalism. I also think, at the heart of really good storytelling is just, being able to remember and deliver a yarn. Like I always remember David Pemberthy, who, is in your book as well, who's like a great tabloid writer and very funny, interesting, smart man. I remember when I first applied for a cadetship at the Advertiser, and I knew Dave socially, and he said, "Oh, well, mate, I don't know, like if you can just tell an anecdote at the pub, that's half the game." And it's true. Like it's actually that capacity to get in conversations with people and see interesting little angles and retell them in a way that kind of sparkles a bit, that is sort of at the core of it.
Oh, definitely. And Dave Pemberthy, I also really highly rate, because so he was the editor of the Daily Telegraph in Sydney for a period of time. He works now in Adelaide. He hosts a breakfast radio show. He writes a column for The Australian. And the Telegraph, under his editorship, it was a tabloid, unapologetically a tabloid newspaper, but it was also a newspaper that had a lot of fun, and it was entertaining for its audience, and it tried very hard to bear in mind what are the concerns of its audience. So, for example, one of the stories that he talks about, and that I remember ran in the paper at the time, and it was bloody hilarious, was the trains in Sydney were just, horrendous. They're totally unreliable. They're always breaking down, stopping between stations. And so they got the marathon runner Steve Monaghetti to race the 7:48 from Petersham to Central to see who would get there faster, a human running or the actual train. And Monaghetti beat it by about 1 minute and 30 seconds or something. But it was just, and they had like a whole feature with shots of like Monaghetti running down the road with the train in the distance. And it was just, it became, the Premier was asked about it that day. It legitimately put the state government under pressure about the train running times, but it did it in a funny, entertaining way. And I think that's, the best of kind of tabloid journalism, when you can do that kind of a thing. But I think, you're quite right that this is, I think, an instinct that, I always say to journalists, like, what's the most interesting thing in this story? Like, sometimes I would get reporters from 7:30, they'd put in their lead for the story that I'd be looking at, and I'd think, this is kind of confused, it doesn't make sense. And I would often get the person over and say, just tell me in your own words what this story's about. And almost always the first thing that they would say would be what they should have written in the lead. It was the most interesting thing about the story. And I think as well, for people, whether you're writing a presentation for work or an assignment, a paper, whatever, a story, a book, asking yourself, I always ask myself, it's not always obvious at the start, but what I try to say is, what is this about?
Yeah.
What is this story about? Because if you can answer, what is this about? And this happened to me when I was writing Any Ordinary Day. It helps you know what is in and what is out, because invariably you have too much material to include. And sometimes you have great material that you really like. There was one whole interviewee in Any Ordinary Day who actually did not make the final book. Luckily, it wasn't someone who talked to me about a traumatic experience. But it was because when I I had a hard time working out what that book was actually about. And when I finally crystallized it, I realized that that interview was kind of tangential to what the book was about. And so then I was able to chop it, and then the structure of it flowed much better and it made better sense. And so I think,
you sent me like the first chapter of that book. Do you remember that? Like,
yeah, and you were like, there's something wrong here.
Yeah, and it was like, it was fine, but it was like obviously just not going to be the first chapter.
Yeah.
And there is this sort of stuck place that you get to with writing books, because there is something sort of, I don't know, like it's a big deal to write a book. It's like you could write, 200,000 words of copy, just like thumping out scripts and whatever. But as soon as it's got this shape of a book, it's much more intimidating. And I think you don't know where to start, and you sort of think that it'll be like this, and then it ends up being something else. And obviously, I mean, like what often happens is you write an intro and you think, this is what I'm wedded to. And then when you get to the end of the book, you discover that it's actually totally different. And so you write something in 10 minutes.
Well, it's
actual intro.
It's a form of, I view it as a form of scaffolding. It's like when you're building a house and you've got scaffolding on, and then as the house starts getting built, you can take the scaffolding off. Like when you were talking just then, I checked. I'm writing this major lecture at the moment, the Andrew Ollie Media lecture that I've got to deliver in a couple of weeks, and it's been through multiple drafts, and half of it had to get chucked out, and then blah blah blah. And I just had to check to see, because every time I write it on my Google Drive, and then I download it to save an actual copy elsewhere. And I just checked at what draft I'm up to. I'm up to draft 16 of that. Now, if you looked at draft 1, it would not bear a great deal of resemblance to draft 16, but you can't get to draft 16 unless you start at draft 1.
Yeah, you're right. And that idea about kicking away scaffolding, like particularly if you're working on something or you're writing a book about something in which you're not expert. I remember writing, like when I was writing The Wife Drought, I was so paranoid because I'm like, well, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an industrial commentator. I don't, all of this stuff is just stuff that I'm writing that is my opinion, but like I'm not qualified. And so I found myself doing all of this reading and kind of thumping out thousands and thousands of words that were about kind of academic research into, workplace culture and stuff like that. And in the end, I just took it away, but it was an exercise in feeling qualified, just learning that stuff and putting it in made me feel okay about, writing the rest of it. And then I'm like, oh man, that's massively boring. That can all go.
Girlfriend, I've just written an entire book about dogs. So speaking of things that I did not know a lot about, Muster Dog's book coming out in January. That's my quick plug. Hey, we've got so many questions. I just want to whip through a couple, and maybe we can just sort of do them quickly. You can answer this one quickly, Leigh. Audio book? Sue wants to...
No audiobook, unfortunately, because there's 32 voices in it and mine, and there's no way to do that easily. And it's not, even though I did record audio of the conversations, they all were, I had about 10 to 12,000 worth of words, which I then had to edit to 3,000 words, and then ask for people's input to check the edit was fine, and they would sometimes change things. So there's no master audio file that can be edited into an audiobook, so no.
Yeah, a lot of the really interesting bits of my interview, like totally cut the, see you later. Well,
when it hit the 2-hour mark, Salesy had to do something, mate.
Exactly.
Callan asks, I'm wondering how a journalist decides how to report on a contentious story if there are grieving people or victims involved, and how do you be sensitive while staying true to the facts? Can I actually answer that one?
Yeah, I was going to ask you to answer that.
Yeah, because it's... come back, Annabelle. I hope she's just topping up her champagne.
She's topping up champagne.
It's something that I had not imagined that my career would be, which is a lot of trauma reporting, and as a foreign correspondent, I covered a lot of difficult stories, got to know a lot of the people well. But I had this amazing experience I just want to quickly share with you, because when I was super young, I was a person and you were sent out to do something called death knocks, which is when your boss tells you to literally go and knock on the door of someone who has gone through some terrible experience, or the family has, to see if they will give you an interview and talk to you about the brother, daughter, aunt, whoever may have passed away or something terrible might have happened. It is a shocking job to do at any time, and as a 21-year-old is just a devastating experience. But because I was young and I was told to do it by my boss, I thought, I've just got to do it. And I don't know whether it was because I was kind of naive and this country kid, I often got a lot of people to speak to me. And I've always wondered what they must have thought of this 21-year-old knocking on their door and asking them to talk about something so deeply sad and personal. Well, a year ago, I was at the Dolby Words Out West Festival in southwest Queensland, and this woman, I was getting ready to speak, and this woman came up to me and said, "Hey, I love your book, and, da-da-da, and I've driven 3 hours to come and see you today." And then she paused and she said, "You knocked on my door 31 years ago." And just immediately I knew that I must have been a young police reporter. And I said to her, "Can you tell me why?" And she said, "Oh, my husband was out kite surfing." And as soon as she said that, I put my hand on her arm and I told the rest of the story. I said, "And he was hit by another kite surfer and he died, and you had a 9-month-old baby and you lived in front of a flower farm. I remember." And we both ended up having a bit of an emotional moment. And I only tell this story because she has given me permission to tell it, because she thinks it's pretty amazing that we were able to connect again 31 years later. I was able to then ask her, "Did I cause you more trauma by turning up on your doorstep that day?" And you know what she said? She said that the family remembered and were pleased that I had spelt her husband's name right in the paper. And so when you ask Helen about how do you treat people who've gone through that, you treat them properly, you treat them well, you treat them with respect, you get their goddamn names right, you spell those names right. And for me, and it's worked for me, maybe not for everyone, but I have stayed in contact with people over the years. I have not just gone, "Well, I've got the story, see you later." With this woman, I hadn't, but now we text all the time. She'll send me a text and tell me she likes what I'm wearing on the telly or something like that. So, yeah, it's really important to treat people properly. And I took it as a badge of courage. I'm talking almost as much as Crabb, so hang on a minute. I'll wind up. But things like the Sandy Hook school shooting in America, I stayed in contact with the parents of one of those children, and the fact that people will let you in the door initially is something, but if they then let you back a year or two later or on an anniversary and they open that door and they're happy to talk to you again, then you have, I hope, done something right with how you've treated them.
Yeah.
I thought that the thing that Chris Reason said in
Exactly.
your interview with him, Sales, was really, because like I started in police rounds too, went on a lot of death knocks. I actually think it's a job that young women get asked to do a lot in newsrooms because they tend to have more success. And I've seen other reporters do really aggressive, go and interview someone, then go and back and knock on the door, bang on the door, and kind of intimidate. Like it's awful. One thing that I thought that Rizzo said that was really observant was if somebody says no, then you, like, it's a no. You don't get anywhere by trying to bully somebody into letting you in if they've said no. And I think that that is, like, a yes is a complicated response, because then you've got to deal with them, you've got to respect them, you've got to look after them. But a no is very rarely a flexible response. And one thing that I learned when I was a kiddie reporter, like, seriously, I'm across the street from the Advertiser building where I did my cadetship. One thing that I learned, and it was from photographers actually, was the art of knocking on the grass, which I've done a couple of times. I remember being sent out once to the home of a couple whose two children had been playing in their station wagon, and they'd got themselves locked in the back of the station wagon, and they'd both expired from heat exhaustion. Like, they had been playing in the car, and it had one of those cage things in the back, like, I don't know, they had dogs or something. And so both of the children died in the back of the car. And, like, I got sent out with a senior photographer to knock on the door of those people. Like, what on earth would those people have to say? It was the most extraordinary thing. And we knocked on the grass, which is
a silent knock, basically.
Yeah, we went there.
Yeah.
But I mean,
yeah,
you do, sometimes you meet people who are undergoing a terrible tragedy, and all people are different, and some of them are garrulous, and some of them want the person that they've lost to be remembered and want it to be a significant story. Like, they want history to remember the person they loved. And so those people are often, actually, they're happy to talk, or they want to talk, or they want to say something, they want to, have something recorded.
yeah.
But anyway, it's a real crapshoot sometimes.
Salzy, I mean, I know the answer to this, but Eleanor asked it, whether you mentor young journalists at the ABC. God, you mentor old journos too, just slightly.
Yeah, I do. Actually, it's one of the more satisfying parts of my current job, actually. Yeah, I do. And I do, I mean, I don't want to kind of talk in too much detail about what I do, because it would easily identify, I think, some of the people that I do stuff with. But I do work with reporters who are doing similar assignments to what I've maybe done in the past. And I work with really junior reporters, or I work with people who are hoping to go overseas, or I sometimes look at people's scripts and give them feedback. I sometimes help people with their presentation. And I must say, I find it massively satisfying to work with people, help them learn how to do something, and then watch them do it and see and think, oh, they're going really well, they're nailing it, they're doing great. Like, it's actually very satisfying. And I also just like, I really enjoy dealing with people in their 20s, because I just like hearing how they think about the world. I like seeing how, despite all the changes that have occurred in the media and in society, I talk to people in their 20s and I just think, oh God, you're just so much like me. You've been here for 5 minutes and you feel like you're going to throw it all in if you don't get London the next time around. It reminds me of exactly what I used to be like, which was, you'd feel like, well, why isn't it my turn to have one of these big jobs? And yeah, it's great.
And speaking of people in their 20s, Annabelle sent me a little text while we were talking to say that she thinks my skin looks quite dewy. Well, the reason that is because I'm already in my pajamas. I've just got this hoodie on over my jammies. I've popped on my serum and my night moisturizer. And that's a little message to tell people we're going to be wrapping up in 5 minutes.
Yes.
So,
well, quickly, let's do a quick rapid fire of questions if you can get through as many as possible.
Can I say one quick thing just about YP, young people in journalism? One thing that does really worry me about the way journalism works now, like across the road there, I started as a cadet reporter, and I was paid to, like, it was a job. I was paid like $26,000 a year, which seemed like $1 million at the time. But what happens now is, like, that newspaper and so many others don't do cadetships. They do internships that are unpaid. And essentially, it means that if you want to learn to become a journalist, you have to have an independent means of support. And Rick Morton has written really well about this in his book, 100 Years of Dirt, which I absolutely recommend. And I think that one of the issues in journalism now is that it is really prohibitive for people who don't have the capacity to work in an unpaid job. Like, it actually has a skewing effect on the diversity of people who actually get to be journalists, and I think that's really worrying.
Yeah, agree.
Hey, Katrina has some advice. Read the Sports Reporter. She says if you're going to do it for the next book, get an ex-player who has made the transition to being a sports interviewer and reporter.
That's interesting.
Which I think is a great idea.
By the way, there won't be another book on this topic.
Oh, damn it.
I'm one of those people, when I finish a book on something, I'm absolutely done with it. All my interest is gone.
Oh, well, maybe Crabb and I can put out the next edition.
Sure.
I mean, it was pretty easy. And Kate was saying these categories that you've put people in, is that how we categorize ourselves in the media, or is that?
Pretty much. I mean, there's a handful of people who can range across different things. Benjamin Law's probably the most diverse person I know in terms of the different range of things that he's able to do. Trent Dalton writes fiction and non-fiction. There's very few people that actually do a big, broad range of stuff. There's a handful, but yeah, mostly people tend to be known for one thing.
Lewis says, do you have a favourite part of the book?
No, not really, but I mean, some of the anecdotes that people tell I just really enjoyed, and also some of those people I just admire greatly. Like, I really am a fan of Nikki Saver, and I really love Laurie Oakes, and so that was like a treat. Those people were kind of, major reporters when I was starting out, and so I, am thrilled that they spoke to me. I'm a great admirer of Hedley Thomas and what he does. I mean, everyone in it, Louis Eroglu, Renee Noataga, just incredible.
I know, you could name them all.
You could just name every single person in the book. They're all amazing.
But if someone doesn't know those names and they're not in the media and they don't want to get in the media, why do they read Storytellers?
Because I think unless you live in a cave, you might not have know these people's names, but you've consumed their work, or things that they've done have actually changed your life or changed society. And also, they're just interesting. Like, Renee Noataga is a photographer, a woman, one of the few female photographers actually who was out on kind of war zone assignments, and she's a portrait photographer as well. Amazing. And she's just interesting. She just has an interesting job, I just find her fascinating. The way, particularly visual storytellers, the way they look at the world, I find amazing, because I'm a words person, so I love talking to people who are pictures people.
But they're not actually that different, are they? I mean, essentially, the art of journalism is about observation, and it is about looking at, like, as Chris Reason did, like the same set of facts or the same press conference as you did with that David Hicks thing, and seeing something and just picking something up and, like, focusing in on it and making it into something. Like, it is a subjective quality of observation that is, I mean, it is a bit visual in some ways.
Yeah, except that somebody like me, when they observe it, then converts that into words, and there's certain things I don't see in the environment around me. Like, to give you an example to use Louis Eroglu, who's cameraman at Four Corners, he and I were having a walk in Sydney, and we were talking about lighting and how lighting can change mood. Lighting's a really precise art form. And Louis said to me, I was asking about natural light and how much you can affect mood just with available light, if not in a controlled environment. And Louis said, oh, you can definitely, use it to your advantage. And he grabbed me and he went, look up there, Salesy. And there was trees. And he went, happy trees. And then he turned me around 180 and pointed me to the trees behind us. And he said, sad trees. And what the trees we were looking at, the sun was behind us and it was hitting the trees. And so those trees were well lit. You could see the color. It was kind of flat. And so they were happy trees. When he spun me around, because the sun was coming through the trees behind us, they were backlit. And so the leaves were in shadow. There was much more shadow. There was shafts of light, and they were sad trees. Now, I could have walked around that area for a million years and not have thought happy trees, sad trees. I would have thought in words about that. And so that's the difference. Like, if you sent me and Louis out both with a camera, he would come back with drastically different material, because the way he sees and observes the world is entirely different to how I do it.
Yeah, but like the thing that you share is the ability to look at a set of facts and find something that sparkles, like find something that is a little thread that you can pull that leads you somewhere else. And I think that that's what Louis does. Like, he's a genius because he can look at a physical set of circumstances or light or whatever and capture something meaningful. And that's the same thing that you do with a set of facts or like a story or like finding a way into a story that makes people shut up and listen.
Yeah.
Okay, girlfriends, it's time for the hoodie to come down.
Thank you very much for staying up. This would be like me staying up till 2 a.m. what Lisa's doing today.
It's amazing. It's a very big effort, Lisa Millar, and you do look dewy fresh.
Thank you, dolls. And the book, it is fabulous, and it's available everywhere where you buy your books or get them from your libraries. I love a great library as well. So, yeah.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.